I paid for a private villa. A quiet retreat. A chance to reconnect with my parents. Instead, they turned it into a spectacle. The moment we arrived, they invited their friends, without asking me. I didn't complain. I just sent a message. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. I should have known. The second I stepped inside, something felt off. The crisp ocean breeze drifting through open terrace doors, the gleaming marble floors, the low hum of conversation, none of it felt right. And then, I heard them. I swear his job is the biggest scam I've ever seen, my father's voice boomed over the chatter. Imagine getting paid a fortune to just sit and click buttons all day. Laughter. Loud. Careless. Humiliating. I froze in the doorway. He's always buried in those screens, my mother chimed in, swirling her wine. No wonder he never had a girlfriend. A man should use his hands for real work. Another burst of laughter. And that's when I saw them. 12 guests. Not strangers, worse. My parents' friends. Their colleagues. My uncle. My father's old work buddies. Men who believed that real work meant lifting something heavy, that a career built on a screen was a joke. They were drinking my whiskey. Eating from my catering. Lounging in the villa I had paid for. I clenched my jaw. This trip had taken months to plan. It was supposed to be just the three of us, a chance to bridge the years of distance, the unspoken disappointments. But of course, they had other plans. My mother turned and spotted me. Her face lit up. Oh. There he is, the tech wizard himself. I forced a smile. Who are all these people? She waved a lazy hand. Just a few friends. Don't be dramatic, sweetheart. My father chuckled, clapping one of his friends on the back. You should have seen their faces when we told them you paid for this whole place. They were so impressed. Impressed. That's what this was, a chance to show off their golden goose. I shouldn't have been surprised. They'd done it my whole life. My father owned a construction business. My uncle was a mechanic. My grandfather worked in a factory, his hands calloused from building things, real work. Then there was me. The kid who spent too much time on computers. Stop hiding behind screens, my father used to bark when I was 16, hunched over my first coding project. No one's going to pay you to sit around pressing buttons all day. Even when I landed my first IT job, making more at 22 than he did in his prime, he laughed. Unbelievable, he muttered at a family gathering. Companies really will throw money at anything these days. And my mother? I just worry about you, she'd sigh in front of her friends. All those hours alone in front of a screen, it's not normal. You should be out in the real world, meeting real people. They had spent years dismissing my work. My success. And yet, they had no problem spending my money. Now, standing in my villa, watching them bask in luxury, they were doing it again. You know, I was just telling them, my father continued, oblivious, how insane it is that people actually pay you for this stuff. I exhaled slowly. For what stuff? He smirked. Sitting around staring at code. It's not like you're building anything real. One of his friends chuckled. Man, if I had a job like that, I'd work 2 hours a day and golf the rest. Right? My father grinned. You could probably train a monkey to do it. That was it. I pulled out my phone and tapped my booking confirmation. And then I saw it. A new invoice from the villa company. Total cost, $52,000. 10 times the original price. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I could afford it. That wasn't the point. The point was that this was too far. I looked up. My parents were still laughing. Still oblivious. I typed a single message. Send. At first, nothing changed. The guests kept drinking. My mother kept giggling. My father kept making jokes at my expense. Then, barely a minute later, my mother's phone pinged. She picked it up lazily, mid-sip of her wine. Her smile froze. Her face drained of color. My father frowned. What's wrong? She opened her mouth but no words came out. Instead, she handed him the phone with trembling fingers. He grabbed it, eyes narrowing as he read. His expression darkened. What is this? The laughter had finally stopped. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of my words settle before I spoke again, my voice steady. That, I said, is the new invoice. My father blinked. Knew what? I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. The villa has an occupancy limit of 6. We're at 18. I gestured at the crowd. Luxury villas charge extra for additional guests. His fingers tightened around the phone. How much extra? I smiled. 10 times the original cost. The room went still. Then my uncle chuckled, clapping my father's shoulder. Come on, he's messing with you. My mother's eyes darted to me, pleading, tell me you didn't approve this. I tilted my head. I didn't approve anything. I just paid for what was used. My father's knuckles turned white around the phone. That's over 50 grand. I raised an eyebrow. I thought I was just a button-clicking monkey who didn't do real work. Shouldn't be a problem for me. My mother flinched. A nervous cough broke the silence. Maybe we should sit down. My father barked something sharp. The guests obeyed. My mother's voice dropped to a sickly sweet whisper. Sweetheart, be reasonable. We're family. Oh, now we're family? A humorless laugh escaped me. Funny. 5 minutes ago, I was just an embarrassment. She exhaled sharply, turning to my father. Maybe we can talk to the manager. Explain the mistake. Get the charge reduced. I shrugged. You can try. My father shot me a glare before storming onto the patio, his voice rising as he demanded to speak to the property manager. My mother turned back, forcing a smile. Honey, you know we didn't mean anything by those jokes, right? I raised an eyebrow. Because you've been saying the same things for years? She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. You mocked my job, my success, but when it came time for luxury, when you wanted the best food, drinks, private beaches, suddenly, my money was good enough. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I looked around the room. The guests sat frozen, wine glasses in hand, caught mid-laughter. You all expected a free ride. Maybe my parents told you they were covering everything. Or maybe you just assumed. I let out a dry chuckle. Either way, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson. The front door swung open. My father stormed back in, red-faced. They won't waive the charges. He growled. They said we should have read the policy. Oh, you should have. I nodded. Because I did. His eyes snapped to mine. You knew? I smiled. Of course I knew. He stared at me like I was a stranger. And you let this happen? I shrugged. You let this happen. I planned a trip for 3 people. You invited 12 extra. You assumed I'd cover the bill like always. His jaw clenched. So what now? You're just going to let this charge go through? Not exactly, I said, pulling out my phone. I made alternative arrangements. My mother's voice turned sharp. What do you mean? I tapped my screen. Send. Check your email. She did. And I watched her face crumble. She turned to my father, horrified. He canceled our booking. My father snatched the phone, scanning the email in disbelief. It says we have to vacate the villa by noon tomorrow. That's right. I pocketed my phone. I rebooked it, for myself. My mother paled. You wouldn't. I would. She let out a nervous laugh. But all the hotels are booked. I shrugged. That sounds like a you problem. My father's fists clenched. You think this is funny? Leaving your own family stranded? I met his glare. You left me stranded years ago. Silence. No laughter, no mocking, just the slow, sinking realization that they had pushed too far. For once, I held the power. I picked up a glass of whiskey, my whiskey, and took a slow sip. Then I looked at them, my voice calm. You should start packing. The clock read 10:47 p.m. It had taken exactly 4 minutes to turn their dream vacation into an absolute nightmare. Outside, the waves crashed softly. Inside, there was only silence. Heavy, uncomfortable. The guests sat frozen, glasses in hand, caught mid-laughter. My mother looked sick. My father's jaw twitched. They weren't laughing anymore. This is a joke, right? My uncle asked weakly. I took another sip. Victory tasted smooth. No. My father's eyes darkened. For the first time in his life, I think he realized I wasn't just the golden ATM he had raised. Son, be reasonable. We're family. How could you do this? Oh, I'm the bad guy now? I raised an eyebrow. You didn't think about me when you filled my villa with freeloaders. But it's just money, my mother blurted, desperation creeping in. You're rich, aren't you? What's the big deal? There it was. Even now, they didn't get it. I exhaled a quiet laugh. Oh, it's just money. I leaned in, my voice like steel. Great. If money's not a problem. I set my glass down. You pay for it. I pulled out my phone, opened the invoice, and held it up. $52,000. I let the number hang in the air. Since everyone here is enjoying the high life, let's split the bill. I turned to the guests, gesturing casually. That's about $4,000 per person. Easy, right? My father's face darkened. My mother nearly dropped her wine glass. What? You heard me. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. I saw it in their eyes, they didn't have the money. All right, I shrugged. If you can't pay, you pack your bags. You can't just kick us out, my mother gasped. I tilted my head. Why not? The villa manager confirmed it. I rebooked the place. It belongs to me for the next 3 weeks. My father's face was turning red. You knew? His voice was dangerously low. I gave him a lazy smile. Of course. He stared at me like I was a stranger. And you just let this happen? You let this happen. I shot back, sweeping my hand around the room. I planned a trip for 3 people. You brought a dozen extras. You assumed I'd just cover everything. My mother's voice wavered. What do you expect us to do? All the hotels are booked. Not my problem. My father's hands curled into fists. You think this is funny? Leaving your own family stranded? I met his glare, unwavering. You left me stranded years ago. Silence. No more mockery, no more jokes, just the slow, dawning realization that they had pushed too far. I took another sip of my drink, savoring the moment. You should start packing. By midnight, the villa was chaos. This is insane, someone cursed as they scrolled through fully booked hotel listings. How are we supposed to get home? They ran around like headless chickens, making frantic phone calls, begging for last-minute accommodations. Me? I just sat back and enjoyed the show. One by one, the guests dragged their suitcases out, their laughter from earlier replaced with muttered curses. My uncle turned at the door, his face twisted in rage. How are we supposed to get back? I gave him the same careless shrug he had given me earlier when laughing at my career. You didn't ask me when you came. Why should I care how you leave? His jaw clenched. He muttered a string of curses and stormed off into the night. And then, finally, it was just me and my parents. My mother's face was streaked with tears. My father stood stiffly by the door, hands clenched into fists. You'll regret this, he said, voice low and dangerous. I smiled, took another sip of whiskey. Maybe. But not tonight. And with that, I shut the door in their faces. Click. For the first time since I arrived, silence filled the villa. No mocking laughter, no patronizing voices, no entitled demands. Just me. Alone. And I had never felt better. I poured myself another drink and stepped onto the balcony. Below, my parents stood on the driveway, their luggage at their feet. My mother paced frantically, tapping on her phone. My father stood rigid, staring at the ocean, fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. They were trapped. No hotel, no spare rooms, no easy way home. I exhaled slowly. For years, I had let them walk all over me. I had paid for their vacations, tolerated their condescension, laughed off their mockery. And they had never once thanked me, never once treated me like anything other than a walking wallet. But tonight? Tonight, they had no one to rely on but themselves. And for the first time in their lives, they were going to have to deal with the consequences. I took a sip of whiskey, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. Then, my phone rang. Mom. I let it buzz. Then another call. And another. 5 missed calls. Then 6. Bang, bang, bang. The pounding on the villa door was so hard the walls shook. Open this door right now, my father bellowed. I took another sip. No. You entitled little. Careful. I warned. You're not in a position to insult me. This isn't funny, my mother cried. We have nowhere to go. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Here it comes. The cycle. The pattern I had grown up with. First anger. Then guilt-tripping. And if that didn't work? Manipulation. Sweetheart, my mother's voice softened instantly. Switching tactics. You can't do this to us. We're your parents. I chuckled. Oh. Now we're getting to the good part. Please, she begged. We made a mistake. All right, but don't punish us like this. You're not a cruel person. No, I'm not. I agreed, but I'm also not a fool. Silence. I stepped closer to the door, leaning against it. Let me guess, I said. If I let you back in, everything goes back to normal. You'll say it was all a misunderstanding, and by next week, I'll be paying for something else you can't afford. That's not fair. Neither was inviting half the city to my vacation. It was just friends who were drinking my liquor, eating my food, and laughing at my job. Silence. I smiled. I had them cornered. Here's the thing, Mom, Dad. I exhaled, calm. I don't care if you made a mistake. You don't respect me. You never have. My father scoffed. Oh, quit the theatrics. Theatrics? My voice hardened. Tell me, Dad, is it theatrics when you laugh at my career in front of your friends? Is it theatrics when you treat me like a joke while spending the money I worked for? Is it theatrics when you expect me to pay for your life without a second thought? Silence. I continued, my voice sharp as a blade. The only time I matter to you is when I'm handing over my credit card. The rest of the time, I'm nothing but a disappointment. That's not true. It is. And tonight, I exhaled, my tone final. Tonight, you get to live with the consequences of treating me like a bank instead of a son. I heard my mother sniffle. Please don't do this. I shook my head, a cold smile forming. Good night. And then, I walked away. I should have expected what happened next. At 6 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message. Dad, we're going home today, but this isn't over. I exhaled slowly, scrolling through the messages. Mom, you've really hurt us. We raised you, we gave you everything, and this is how you treat us? Dad, don't forget where you came from. Mom, we're still your parents. One day, you'll regret this. It was so predictable it almost made me laugh. First anger. Then guilt. And then, the final attempt to reassert control. But this time, I wasn't playing their game anymore. I put my phone on silent, set it on the nightstand, and stretched. The villa was quiet now. Peaceful. For the first time in years, I had finally set boundaries. And it felt incredible. I thought it was over. That morning, I sat on the villa terrace, sipping my coffee, staring at the empty driveway where my parents had stood the night before. The air smelled like salt and victory. I should have felt guilty. I didn't. For the first time in my life, I had drawn a line. And this time? They had no choice but to respect it. Or so I thought. At noon, my phone buzzed again. Mom, we just got home. Let's talk when you're ready. I ignored it. Dad, you humiliated us in front of our friends, after everything we've done for you. Ignored. For the next 2 days, the messages kept coming. Some were pleas. Others were thinly veiled threats. Mom, sweetheart, families don't do this to each other. Dad, if you want to cut us off, fine, but don't expect us to be there when you need help. Mom, just call us. Let's fix this before it gets worse. And then, on the third day at 8:36 a.m., my phone rang. It was my boss. Hey, he said, his voice hesitant. Just wanted to check in. Your parents called our office this morning. I nearly dropped my coffee. Excuse me? Yeah. They said they were concerned about your mental health, that you've been acting irrationally, making impulsive financial decisions. They wanted to know if everything was okay at work. I stood up so fast my chair nearly toppled over. You've got to be kidding me. Nope, my boss sighed. Look, I told them we don't discuss our employees' private matters, but you might want to handle this before it escalates. My hand shook as I ended the call. They had gone too far. I had expected manipulation. I had expected guilt tripping. But this? This was a direct attack on my career. I took a deep breath, opened my phone, and typed. Me, you crossed a line. Don't ever call my workplace again. Mom, we were just worried about you. Me, no. You were trying to destroy my job because I stopped paying for your life. Me, this is the last time I speak to either of you. Dad, don't be dramatic. Me, watch me. And then, I blocked them. Their numbers. Their emails. Their social media accounts. For the first time in my life, I cut them off completely. 1 month later. It was strange at first. For years, my life had been dictated by their needs. My finances. My time. My energy. All of it had gone toward making their lives easier. Now, there was silence. No messages. No sudden financial emergencies. No guilt tripping. Just me. Living for myself. I moved. To a different city. A new apartment. A fresh start. I threw myself into my work. Picked up old hobbies I had abandoned. For the first time in forever, I wasn't waiting for the next call asking for money. It felt freeing. Until the inevitable happened. The last message. 2 months after I cut them off, I got an email from my mother. I almost deleted it without reading it. But something made me pause. I opened it. Subject, I'm sorry. The message was short. I don't know if you'll ever speak to us again. I don't blame you, but I want you to know. I regret everything. We were wrong. I was wrong. And now, I finally understand. We took you for granted. We thought you'd always be there, and now we've lost you. Your father won't admit it, but he knows too. He just doesn't know how to say it. I don't expect you to forgive us. I just hope one day you'll be able to look back and remember us as something other than what we became. No matter what, we love you. That was it. No request for money. No attempt to manipulate me. Just an admission of defeat. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, I closed the email. I didn't reply. Not because I hated them. Not because I wanted revenge. But because, for the first time in my life, I finally understood something. Love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Family doesn't mean financial servitude. And sometimes, walking away is the only way to be free.